Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day.
What's good, everyone? Welcome into the Bucks Film Room podcast. My name is Brian Sampson. I'm the host. You can find me on Twitter at Bucks Film Room. This show drops every Monday. You can find it on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on YouTube. I write about the Milwaukee Bucks for Forbes Sports and for Dairyland Express. Today, we have a really good guest on the show, and I'm excited to play this conversation for you all. We dive deep into the Bucks and take a glass half full. Last week, I talked a lot about the defense and my concerns, and I stand by that. I think that we still need to see a lot of progress there with the Bucks. I also want to give us a balanced picture about here's who the Milwaukee Bucks are right now. So today, we try to focus more on the optimistic side of what we're seeing with the Bucks, and it's a really great conversation. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's just dive right into it. All right, joining me now is Justin Garcia. This has been a few weeks in the making. He's a Milwaukee Bucks or the Milwaukee Bucks radio network analyst and a co-host of Locked On Bucks. You can find him on Twitter or X or whatever it's called these days. You can find him at Justin Garcia NBA. Justin, to start out with, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you're extremely worried about where the Bucks are right now, you think they'll lose in the first round of the playoffs, 10 being you're very optimistic, they're going to win the NBA championship this year. Where are you at 1 to 10 on that scale?
I'm definitely not 10 or all the way to that extreme. I'm not a 0 or a 1. I think there's clearly been some things that we know need to be addressed. So I'd probably be somewhere lower on the scale, like a 3 or a 4 at this point, in that maybe like a 3. I'll if I have to pick one number, I'll say a 3, because we've seen some subtle growth in some of the issues that all of us have pointed to being very problematic for this team early in the season. The one thing that I would point to, I don't know if this is good or bad, and if you want to say it's bad, you would point to last year, is they have outperformed their performance. They've outplayed their performance. That their expected wins right now, I think, are 11, and they're 14-6. They led the league in that last year, where they were the team whose expected win total was much lower than any other team than where they finished. So is that a good or a bad thing? Maybe last year it proved to be a bad thing. This year, I think the big difference is number 0 and what Damian Lillard has helped them do to close out games. So it's a tough comp, but overall, we've seen some things improve that we pointed to for the first couple of weeks. And I think the large picture is the fact that this defense has basically been league average for the last, 2-3 weeks, to me is a positive. Because if you can at least be an average defense with the way this offense has changed, and especially in the half court, their ability to score there, the belief is, well, our offense can take it from there. So because of that, that's driven down my level of concern.
I've seen that stat, and I think you were the first one to post it last week or something like that about like their defense over the last 2 weeks or whatever, being around league average. And I'm torn by seeing that, because part of me is like, oh, great. And then the second part of me is, well, look who they played as well. They played the Wizards in there twice, the Bulls. And so I never know how to take that. Well, I do know how to take that. I never know how people want to receive that, right? If people just want me to be, or someone to be, that rain cloud over their sunny day, but it's a good start, right? It'd be way more concerning if they weren't posting those numbers against those teams. So I guess on the glass half full side, we can say at least they're doing what they're supposed to be doing against those quality teams. So speaking of glass half full, that's kind of where I wanted to take our conversation to begin with today. Last week on this pod, I talked a lot about the 3 issues that I saw with the defense. Today, we're going to balance it out. We're going to talk about, we want to be real. We want to talk about what our concerns are, what we're seeing, but we're just going to start it out with a little bit of glass half full. So I asked Justin to think about his 3 biggest, most positive takeaways from the Bucks and what he's seeing this season. So we're just going to go back and forth. I don't know what his are. He doesn't know what mine is. So Justin, I'm going to let you tip us off here. What's your most positive takeaway that you've seen from Milwaukee this season?
I guess it would be, I don't know how to weave this all into one, but it would start with Brook Lopez, in that I guess it's a couple of points weaved into one. Adrian Griffin's willingness to bend on the defense that he brought in and envisioned running. It took 4 games for him to realize we should change this, and we should switch how we're using Brook Lopez. So I think it's a positive for any young coach, and especially a first-time coach who had been through the interview process, 14 times, to say everything I envisioned, we're going to change this, and I'm going to do more of what the other group wanted to do. It's tough because you don't know if you'll get that ownership and you'll get to run what you want to do going forward, that this may just be a sign of we're never going to do what I envisioned. And that's tough for a lot of people. So I think for Griff to be willing to concede that after 4 games was big. And the fact that Brook Lopez looks every bit a quarter of the way through the season, the defensive player he was a season ago as well, is very big. So the performance of Brook, to me, 20 games into the season, is one of the big positives, because that was one of the major questions when we heard the defense that Adrian Griffin wanted to run. And granted, it hasn't been that we've seen in large part, but I think the big question was, what does this mean for Brook Lopez? Number one, can he do that? And also the minor question was, we just paid a lot of money to a guy that's in his mid-30s, that is 2 years removed from back surgery. At what point do we start to see decline? And at least through the first 20 games of the season, that point is not right now.
Yeah, he's looked really good on defense this year. That was one of my points too. So I'm just going to build off of what you're talking about. I think there's a case to be made about why did Adrian Griffin even try to start with a different defense after the Bucks had been so dominant. But to give him credit, glass half full, he did make the switch after some players who are not named went to him and asked him to switch. I was looking that up earlier in preparation at this point. Brook Lopez actually averages more blocks this year than he did last year, and in like 1 fewer minute per game. I think that speaks to, I know the Bucks have been good at keeping opponents away from the hoop, but not so good at when they get to the hoop, allowing them to score. But the fact that he's averaging more blocks than last year when he had an elite defensive season, that says a lot. I think that he's been, yeah, like you said, at least through the 20 games, we've seen no signs that he's going to slow down on both ends of the court, really, but at least on defense. So when he's out there on defense, according to Cleaning the Glass, the Bucks have a 113.3 defensive rating. So that would be 12th in the NBA if that was applied all the time. So that's exactly where they need to be. He has a lot more, I think, to clean up this year than he has last year when Drew Holiday was out there leading the charge. I mean, the two guys who are now mostly guarding the perimeter, it's like the floodgates have opened up, right? Everybody gets past them. All right. A lot of times people get past them, but yeah, he's been great. I've been super excited to see his play has not declined.
Well, and to piggyback off of that too, I think one of the more interesting things that we've seen is early in the season. I know we were tracking closely how the Bucks looked with Giannis on the floor versus when it was Dame on the floor, and at first those numbers were staggering, that they were performing much better with Giannis on the floor versus when Dame was, and especially on the defensive side, which I think is for rather obvious reasons. But we've seen both of those start to level out in the last couple of weeks, to the point where, again, this doesn't really paint the entire picture, but their defensive numbers have actually been better with Dame on the floor versus with Giannis on the floor. I attribute that to Brook Lopez, because we've seen Dame paired with Brook more than anything else. That Giannis seems to be paired with Chris, and then Dame seems to be paired with Brook. So I think that's another big reason for this defense to kind of stabilizing and getting back to league average.
Yeah, it's been good to see. We are desperate for some positiveness, if that's a word. And Brook Lopez has been dominant on the defensive end. It's good to see. I don't think he's going to get the love. Usually when your defense as a whole struggles, you don't get the same amount of love as the last few years when we've seen Drew, Giannis, and Brook all get a lot of love and awards for their work. When your defense is more toward the bottom, you aren't going to get that same recognition. I wouldn't expect him to be in a lot of those conversations like he has the last couple of years, but that doesn't mean that his level of defense has dipped. That's good to see. Do you have a second? So I piggybacked off yours. I'm just going with that. So I'm going to toss it back to you. What's your second positive takeaway?
My second positive takeaway, and again, I'm going to view it positively, but this is another one of these. Well, I could point to the other here, but it's just what the Bucks have done in the fourth quarter overall, where we spend so much time talking about how the Bucks have been so good in the clutch, that I think the latest update, they're the number one net rating in those clutch games, and I think they're third in offense and somewhere around the middle of the pack in defense. But in fourth quarter, it's even better. That has been their best quarter. And Adrian Griffin has mentioned quite a bit this year. The fourth quarter has to be your best quarter, and the last 5 minutes of that are especially critical. This team has embraced that. Now it's more of a matter of the previous 36 minutes that you'd like to see things translate over to. But they have been dominant in the fourth quarter, and it's been defense early was getting them by, but now as that chemistry is really continued to develop with Giannis and Dame, and with Dame and the rest of his teammates especially, it's been the offense carrying them. Where, again, the big difference between this year and last year, and I think why, albeit just the regular season, but why this team has been better at figuring out how to win those games is because of their half-court offense and the element that Damian Lillard adds. Still leads the league in clutch scoring. He's a guy that can make himself available for the inbounds pass, which we'd seen in previous years as an issue with this team. And he can certainly make those shots at the free throw line and tough shots at the end of the game. So, last year and the last 5 years, the approach was really our defense is going to dominate if our offense can just hit enough shots. We've seen it flip completely this year. And in the fourth quarter, it's been enough. So for all the criticisms we've levied against other teams like the Celtics and even this Bucks team in the past, if they just can't figure out how to win games, I know it's just the regular season, but so far this year's version of the team has.
One thing that I go back and forth on, I can't tell if it drives me crazy or if I like it, is their calmness. They just don't get rattled, whether they're down 26 points in the third quarter or late in games. They're always just calm. I mean, they have Bobby Portis, who can be a rah-rah guy, Jay Crowder. But other than those two, and I think a lot of this is from Damian Lillard's leadership. That's really his personality, is he's just a silent assassin, to borrow a term that people use for Greg Gard. So he just stays calm no matter what the situation is. And I don't know that helps them first through third quarters, or I shouldn't say it hurts them, but I wish they'd have a little bit more urgency. But it certainly, in my opinion, plays a pivotal role or pivotal factor in that fourth quarter, those clutch time minutes of he just doesn't get rattled. And what I've been impressed about is coming in, he's a lethal scorer. He can get his own shot, but he seems to always make the right play. He does a great job of balancing, getting his shot, but also using his teammates and finding the open player. And I think that goes a long way to why they're so successful in those games, because he's dangerous to hit that step back or to do what he does. But then you can't leave your guy if you're defending off ball, because he has such great vision and court awareness that he'll make that right read and make that right play.
Yeah, and I know Dame talked about it a little bit after the Hawks game. We had Bobby Portis on our post game on the radio network, and I asked him too, Bobby, can you explain why you guys have been so good in these fourth quarters and especially in those final 5 minutes? And I think his answer and Dame's answer were pretty refreshing in that Bobby had said, number one, we're a resilient group, and you think back to the previous 5 years that a lot of that group was there for. And certainly he was there in 2021 when they went through a lot of that with those comebacks in the playoffs against the Nets, that they don't get rattled, to your point. They remain calm. They've been through all of that before. But he and Dame after the game too did make it clear, look, this is not ideal. We're not trying to play every single game like this. And Bobby said, I've brought it up too, and we need to do a better job the first three quarters. We can't get off to these slow starts. So there's at least the acknowledgement of that. But I do think it's a battle-tested group, and especially when you add in Damian Lillard, for as good as Drew Holiday was, and I think you and I have both raved about him in the past, offensively he was not that calming influence that Damian Lillard is, and it's even more psychological too. When you have that guy on your side, it goes a long way in changing your confidence and your mindset. And you had that defensively with Drew, but it was nowhere near what you have offensively with Damian Lillard.
Yeah, so building off of that, my second positive, just stick with Damian Lillard, it's around that same track, is so he got off to a slow shooting start this year. I'll be honest, I was a tad bit worried. I was like you hear Portland fans and analysts say this is normal for him, but I was it kind of kept on going. But the last 10 games, he's really turned it around. He's shooting almost 39% on threes. And I think he's averaging 8.7 threes per game in that span too. So it's been really good. to see him do that. The whole gravity of the Bucks offense shifts when he's knocking down those shots. I mean, just shifts normally because of where defenders have to pick him up at. But that's just, it's been crazy to see how he can get a shot off of those high pick and rolls with just the defender taking one back pedal. He reads that and can pull up. And that ability to space the floor and really get hot these last 10 games now has been amazing, both in these late game situations, because I think he's been doing that toward the end of games all season long, but now he's been applying that throughout the rest of the game. So I think it's been good to see his offense get clicking, because really, like you mentioned, the Bucks in the past relied on their defense to get stops and their offense to score some. Now it's going to be reverse. It's going to be their defense to get some stops and their offense to score a lot. And they're going to need Lillard and Giannis at their full capacity to make that happen. So it's been really fun to see. I mean, with Portland being out west, a lot of Dame's games were late. You see the highlights, but you don't see the consistency, him doing it game in and game out and just going about his job in a professional way. So it's been fun to see him manipulate the defense to get those shots off, and the way that he attacks the rim too. I've been impressed by, maybe I was ignorant or naive, but just how he utilizes the threat of his shot at the 3-point line to burst past players has been amazing to see. And I think it was before the season started, he was confident in his ability to maintain his athleticism through or into his late 30s and even maybe 40. I forget exactly what age, but I think that's key to his game, is being able to use that threat of his shot and get downhill, blow past defenders, either finish at the rim or draw those fouls that he's been so good at. But I've been impressed by his streak over the last 10 games.
Yeah, so I had a very similar positive for my third with just the overall play of Damian Lillard, because similar to you, I don't know about concerns, but you at least raised an eyebrow early in the season with like, look, I get everything that was different for him in the offseason, but like I kind of expected a little more than this after a couple of games. And everybody that you would talk to in Portland would say the same of, don't worry, he's a slow starter. And it got so much to the point that I think it was through the first 9 games, we went in and digged into, like, year by year, Damian Lillard through his first 9 games, how does it translate to what he's doing? And it basically lined up for this is just what he does to start his seasons, because everybody, when they would point to he's a notorious slow starter, if you just looked at the splits by month, there was no major difference. So that just kind of points to he's really bad for the first handful of games for whatever reason, and then he's really good to kind of even it out the rest of the way. So I don't want to get too much into that, because I think everything you said I agree with. My third, I would say, and look, this is more of a very, very small sample size that we saw it, and more hopeful and projection for the future. But the big concern coming into this season was the perimeter defense. And I'm not trying to say it's solved, but the big question more so was, who do you have that you can trust? I was very impressed, and that's a big blow for it to come this early. I was very impressed with Jay Crowder and how he looked, because last year, not only the offense, but just defensively, he was not a guy that you could trust on the perimeter. He was basically a small ball 4. And this year, you've seen him balance both of those when he was really starting to click. Everybody's talked about MarJon Beauchamp and the strides that he continues to take. He's still getting that playing time, although I think a lot of people would argue not quite enough. It's going to be interesting to see how much that starts to kick up as this team just one by one continues to lose guys on the wing. But I think you've seen enough from MarJon to know, not like he's an all-star, but you've seen enough to feel like I trust this guy to play minutes in a playoff series. And Andre Jackson Jr., too, the absolute revelation that everybody has raved about. I'm just going to parrot everything that we've said about him, because from day one, he has come in and done the little things and has been that guy that just brings that basketball IQ with him. I think the first preseason game against the Bulls, you saw his ability to move the ball and act like a floor general and basically a point guard, and that popped off the page. But one by one, you've seen his defensive acumen. And, I've pointed to it during games a couple of times where some of the things that you may not notice as you're watching the game, but if you're looking for it, it really stands out. Giannis goes to contest in the corner and leaves his man right there on the boards, and Andre Jackson Jr. recognizes that, gets a body on him. He's done a number of those types of things in his playing time. He's another guy that I think you look at and you say, I trust that this guy is going to be something for them. Adrian Griffin has said he's going to be a very big part of what we do. I don't know if that's this year or next year or in the playoffs, but he is going to be a big part of us. And, I think any concerns over the playing time now, I would just say, I think there's a method to everything that they're doing, and gradually it's going to start to increase. That with Griff especially, we have seen if you earn the minutes, you'll get the minutes. And Andre Jackson Jr., the only flaw in his game so far has been the fouls, and that's just going to be the case for every young player.
Yeah, I agree with Andre Jackson Jr. I've been impressed by him. The point you make about the fouls, he just needs to learn to tone it down a little bit. Sometimes he
Yeah.
has a little bit too much thanasis in him on that defensive side of the ball, but he'll learn to tone that down. And I've even been impressed by his shooting, regardless of the percentages. Last week, I think to one of his threes that he banked in, he had his feet kind of either stacked right on top of each other or crossed, which just shows you like it he's a little rushed in his fundamentals on that, but he's been taking those with confidence. That's the first step, but he's doing a little bit of everything, especially on defense. He can guard right now. He could probably guard 1 through 4. The 4 and the 1 might be a little bit of a stretch, but you're confident having him switch 1 through 4. So that's good. I agree with your.
No, I was just going to say, I know it's crazy borderline crazy when you look at the individual defenders on the team to suggest after 20 games. I don't think it's hyperbole that he is already the best perimeter defender they have.
Yeah, I said last week that, so I think I would agree with that. And I think it's all relative I think he's their best perimeter defender, but I don't know that that makes him a good perimeter defender. If that
And I
makes
don't know that
sense.
that's a good thing. Yeah, it more
Yeah.
speaks to some of the hits that they took defensively on the perimeter.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to Jay Crowder, I agree with you as well. He looked really good on both ends of the court. I was happy with that. I still have this image last year, first round of the playoffs, Jimmy Butler cooking Drew Holiday. They tried to put Crowder out there in one of the early games. Butler was about 20 feet away from the hoop on the right wing, right elbow area, right extended elbow. He jab stepped to his right and went to his left, and Crowder looked like he was just stuck in the mud, was a whole 2 steps behind Butler. That image I'll never get out of. I think that's just in my mind a perfect example of just Crowder's year last year. It's obvious he worked hard over the summer, got back into shape. He was playing really well. I hope he can get back to where he's playing at the beginning of the season. I think we've agreed on a lot here, so I'm going to disagree on your take about Champ. I'm worried about Champ. I think that defensively, he has long arms. I think that he is active on defense. I think he has a good mindset on that end, but I don't know that he has the lateral quickness. I've seen way too many blow-bys in the last couple of weeks, and maybe some of it's just exaggerated because of how far out that all the defenders are being asked to play. But that worries me is I don't know that he has it on offense, so he has to bring it on defense right now, at least. And I've seen a lot of concerns where he just gets blown by. He's still working. He added muscle in the offseason, but I think he still has a way to go on that end. So I've just been concerned about his defense. I think right now he's been in kind of a rut the last week or two where he's figuring out, and part of that's going to happen. Like, you need guys to play through that. It's not just going to be, oh, you start getting playing time and you're going to be great. Everybody goes through these ups and downs. So maybe he'll come out of it. Maybe I've been too harsh on him in the past because I've never just jumped right on the Beauchamp bandwagon. But we've seen good things. If both are true, we've seen good strides from him, good things. And I need to see more from him if he wants to, in my opinion, if he wants to be part of that playoff rotation.
Yeah, and it's interesting with him too, because I think people would point to the offense, and you talked about some of the growth you've seen from Andre Jackson, or being surprised there. I think we're all surprised at at least what we were sold of MarJon. The offense is better than we expected, but it's still clunky. That when you look at how he's scoring, and I know Frank Madden has brought this up quite a bit, but it's still awkward when he leaps, that he's a 2-footed jumper that we see here. But your point too about the perimeter defense is a solid one, and I don't think it's a coincidence that last night in the game against the Hawks, you think back to the first matchup, he was the guy that was defending Trae Young. He may have had 2 reps at that in last night's game. He got into foul trouble in that first game, and that was a week where it was Tyrese Maxey and Trae Young, and it was just one after another that he had to deal with with quicker, smaller guys out there. And that has been a bit of an issue for him. I think there's been kind of a realization these last 2 years, year and a half, that there was a belief they could meld him into a guy that defends 1 through 4. We're not quite there yet, and it's been more so of you trust him more against threes, and not so much trust, but he's more apt to take on larger guys than smaller guys. So that's been the biggest difference that we've seen with his game versus what you envisioned coming in.
Yeah, he's made strides. You mentioned Trae Young. I had to shake my head there. His foul baiting was driving me crazy last night on the Bali broadcast. Even Lisa Byington and Marcus Johnson were talking about it. When those two start calling you a flopper and saying things like that, you know you've gone over the line. But yeah, he's struggled with that. And part of that is just his savviness. I think he gets a little overzealous. He wants to be that lockdown defender. He wants to be that go-to guy for the Bucks. And so sometimes I think he just gets a little bit overzealous. The other thing is, even though he's in his second year, he's already 23 years old too, which he has some room for growth, but it's not like, and I forget this, of like, he played 1 year in the G League or whatever. So you'd think he'd be 21 or whatever, but he's 23 already. So that timeline is going to come quicker for him than others, but he made a positive stride, a lot of season left. He's going to get playing time, especially with all those questions they have on the wing. We'll see. He's got 60 so more games to earn his spot, which is good for him. My last positive takeaway is on this Giannis Dame partnership. I've seen them really improve together in going both ways, both with Damian Lillard as a ball handler, but also with Giannis as a ball handler too. I've seen them improved early in the year. Giannis would be on these fast breaks or these secondary breaks, and he would just try to charge down the lane, fight through three guys, and with Damian Lillard on his right side on the wing spaced out and Lillard's guy in the lane helping. Now he's looking for Lillard more in those situations, which is excellent because Lillard's guy is stuck in an impossible situation. Do you help on this freight train barreling down the lane who can't be stopped by one guy, or do you leave one of the most lethal shooters in the NBA? And so far, at least most of the time, that defender is choosing to stop Giannis, leaving Dame open. So he's done a lot better job of finding Lillard in those situations. And Lillard has figuring out how to feed him in that pick and roll. Early in the year, we saw Giannis catch those in the short rolls, and he was confused. He could tell he wasn't used to getting that ball in such an advantageous position, and the game was going too quick for him. It's starting to slow down for him. He's starting to figure that part out. He's not used to operating with that much room or the defenders rotating over from where they're coming from. So it's good to see both of those guys starting to figure out. I wish that they would spam pick and rolls a little bit more when they went into overtime against the Bulls. They didn't run one pick and roll between the two at all in overtime. Maybe they're keeping that for later in the season. That's the only optimistic take, since we're being optimistic here. That's the only optimistic thought I have, is maybe they're just building this up slowly. Their offense has been humming along without running those every time, so might as well not let defenses adjust. But it's been good to see them through the first 20 games continue to get better. I saw or read somewhere that they watch film with each other at Giannis's house. They spend a lot of time together. That's good. They seem really bought into this partnership, and not just at practice or at games, but behind the scenes and every single day.
They both seem very comfortable with this role that I think early on, it wasn't a your turn, my turn, but those first handful of games, it was both of them figuring out, is this my spot or should I take over here, and vice versa. And I think it was the moment when we saw Dame miss a game and Giannis missing those 2 games where Giannis out, Dame got to take over. And you think back to that Raptors game where that was the first time this season where we really spoke about the ball movement and the spacing and how much it really changed things. And then when Giannis was playing without Dame, it was the same thing, where that's right around the time we saw him start to kind of let things come to him. That I think the last 12 games he's played, he's shot 60% or better in 8 of those games. And the noticeable thing too, which you knew would come with time, was early in the season, there were so many plays where Giannis would just throw the ball to a spot and waiting for a teammate to be there, and nobody's there. Maybe Malik Beasley moved into the corner, or you had nobody where Giannis expected them to be. And that's natural with a new system. We've seen a whole lot less of that, where there seems to be more of that chemistry, and especially between Giannis and Dame Lillard, where, Dame is perfectly fine with Giannis setting the tone and he taking over late. And I think it's also a very big credit to Giannis that, even with the reputation that Damian Lillard brings with him, Giannis is the guy, and Giannis is going to go down as the greatest player in the history of this franchise. And he's still been willing to say, okay, let's look for Dame and let's him close this out for us.
Yeah, I think they've both done a great job of balancing that. And look, their number one goal is to win, whether that means Giannis gets 50, Dame gets 50, they both get 25, whatever. They just want to win. And they've done a good job of figuring that out. I like the point that you made about the my turn, your turn. For me, that's why I was so excited about this partnership is they're both elite players in their own rights. But when you put them together, they have the potential to take each other to new heights. And that I think is what separates them from the other duos in the NBA. You look at like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, they have to be more than my turn, your turn. Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, they're more of that. All right, you ISO, I ISO. Maybe they can mix up some pick and rolls together, but this Giannis and Dame partnership really has, in my opinion, and I'm not biased at all, really has the opinion to take each other to new heights because whoever's guarding Giannis isn't going to just be able to switch on to Dame and vice versa. Like they're always going to have an advantage in that way.
It was interesting when, I was just going to say real quick too. It was interesting when the Bucks played the Blazers, excuse me, last week, and Chauncey Billups talked for like 15 minutes prior to the game. And as you would imagine, every single question was about Damian Lillard. And he gave some very long, thoughtful answers. But the biggest thing was, number one, it's going to take time and he's going to figure things out. But also, I think that people are starting to realize as we already touched on, he's a much better passer than he got credit for. That you think about Damian Lillard as the guy that scored late in Portland. But why Chauncey Billups pointed to, it's going to take time, but when it gets there, it's going to be at another level because from Damian Lillard's perspective in the past, all these coverages that he'll see through time to time in games, he saw it before, where you would blitz him, you'd try to get the ball out of his hands, but he had to work his way open, get the ball back, and carry that offense after he did that. Whereas here, he can give it up, and the ball will make its way to Giannis. Maybe Brooke or Chris have a good look. If nothing's there, Damian Lillard's out there as well. So it's a different mindset for him, and it's something that Chauncey Billups said is going to prolong the amount of time that he can be an elite player, and is something that will eventually, once that chemistry is fully ironed out, that's the biggest thing that would make the offense elite.
Yeah, it's been impressive to watch him go to work. The way that he diagnoses defenses, understands where his teammates are, where Giannis is going. That's for me, that's been by far the most impressive or most surprising part that most surprised I've been about his game. So that's been really great to see. So we got our glass half full takes. A lot of good stuff going on with the Bucks. We all acknowledge that. We'd be remiss to ignore maybe some of the concerning stuff. So last week on the pod, I talked about the Bucks defense and three concerns that I saw, which were the scheme, asking his players to adjust to the scheme instead of vice versa, players' inability to keep the ball in front of him, and then just a lot of ball watching. I guess I just fed you my answers. But Justin, what is your take on the Bucks defense and Adrian Griffin so far?
We touched on a little bit of it early in that there has been signs of growth, but I think you're going to need to continue to see that growth. That I agree with basically everything that you laid out, that I think we've seen that quite a bit this season. And look, the other part, I'm not saying this explains why this group has struggled as much as they have defensively, but they're currently dealing with a lot of issues in terms of injury when you think about guys that would take some of those matchups. And we've seen Griff, at least early in the season when this group was healthy, he wasn't beholden to these are the five guys that are going to close the game. He went a lot more situationally based. And I think part of that is trying to figure out what you can do and when you can do it in various scenarios. And the other part is just seeing who do I trust the most to implement everything that we want to do. So that kind of puts everything on hold of fully examining how are things going to look here until you get some of those bodies, notably Jay Crowder back out there. But yeah, the ball watching is big. And I just keep going back to, it's not just defense. It's overall what they've done on the glass is the most perplexing thing to me, because this is a group that for the last 5 years has been number one or in the top five in total rebounding in basically all rebounding categories, except for offensive those first 2 years. And they plummeted to being a bottom 10 team. They've done a much better job in the last, 8 games, 2 weeks or so. a lot of those opponents have been bad rebounding teams, but at least it's a step forward in winning those battles that you should. But it still remains an issue. And, especially when they're playing some of these inferior teams, when you think about that game against the Blazers and the Bulls, as you're still figuring things out, and especially if you don't have an elite defensive unit anymore, you cannot give up second chance points and the amount of offensive rebounds this team does. And you can't jumpstart the opponent's offense with all these turnovers that we've seen. So transition defense is the big one that remains very, very problematic. That we've, you mentioned the blow bys that we continue to see, and just it seems like, I wouldn't say miscommunication, but more so confusion is probably the wrong word too, because that makes it sound like they're not being coached. But confusion in the sense of, wait, what do we do here? Do we do this now? And part of it is just trying to break the habits from the last 5 years. I think all of that has kind of bled through to what we're seeing this season. But it would certainly seem like the easiest things to address. For personnel reasons, we've already talked about the defense maybe not being what it is, but maybe only slightly better than what we're seeing now is what your ceiling is with this group. But things like rebounding and transition, that is not limited to personnel. And those are things with this personnel that the team has, they should be doing a much better job in. And some of that ties to the defense, but just overall how they've looked in those two areas.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It's already been a roller coaster. We're only 20 games into the season. They're at 14-6, which I think is tied for second in the Eastern Conference heading into Monday's play-in games, or the quarterfinals. Is that what it's called in the in-season tournament? The quarterfinals
yeah.
Or knockout round. So the last 60 games, I hope will hold a lot of growth, because this is also Griffin's first 20 games as a head coach. And I think I want to point out, so when they played the Heat last Tuesday, Spoelstra, in my opinion, the best coach in the NBA, I think he really gave it to Griffin with his rotations and with his matchups. Bucks jumped out to this huge lead right away. They talked about starting fast. They started fast in the first few minutes, but Griffin is really, I think what I'm learning about him is he's a creature of habit. He's stuck in these rotations. Like, even I could tell you right now, his rotations almost two down to the minute. First quarter, Damian Lillard plays all 12 minutes. Campaign comes in for 4 minutes, 5 minutes, and then Damian Lillard, his bigs, Giannis comes out at the 7 or 8 mark. Bobby Portis goes in, and Spoelstra used that against Griffin. So Lopez was shutting down Bam Adebayo to begin the game. So Spoelstra took him out early, knowing that Brook Lopez was going to be in the game for a few more minutes, and then it was going to be Portis in there. So took out Bam. Bam came back in. Then instead of being Bam on Brook, it was Bam on Bobby Portis. And Bam just lit him up. And even though Bam maybe didn't score all the points, he was creating offense for the team, getting shooters open. And I mean, that's not something that is just on Griff. Spo does that to a lot of coaches. And I think part of it too comes back to philosophy. Like right now, trying to figure out your rotations, figure out who those are maybe adjustments that you'll make during the postseason of not just sticking with the same rotations every single night, every single game. But I think that was a good learning experience for Griffin, is the whole game changed within that first 5 minutes, in my opinion, because of that one substitution pattern that Spo used against Griffin. So it'll be exciting, in my opinion, to see then how Griffin grows these next 60 games. He's only been a head coach for 20 games now. What will the next 60 games? Hopefully, we talk about guys like Champ and Andre Jackson Jr. growing with playing time. Hopefully the same happens with Griffin as he understands his team better. There becomes a more clear picture, and everything, he figures out how all the pieces fit better together. One thing that I think will help him, and I just want to ask you this real quick before we wrap up. So we've acknowledged the Bucks' limited ability to keep defenders in front of them. Two-part question. Do you think they have the ability to trade for a perimeter defender? And so do they have the ability, and do you have any ideas? And I'm just throwing this out there. We didn't talk about this beforehand. Do you have any ideas about who would be gettable around there in the NBA? As you think for a second, I've talked about Caruso being a great fit. To be honest, that's probably out of the Bucks draft capital range. I think it'd be an amazing fit. But so do you think they have the assets to trade for someone? And do you have any thoughts just off the top of your mind about who might be a good fit?
Well, I mean, I have the thoughts over the players that you would certainly envision and would say, man, wouldn't it be great if the Bucks could land this guy? I think everybody's going to point to the same two names at the start in Alex Caruso, and Dorian Finney-Smith was another guy that came up earlier in the season. Look, the tough part is in terms of their assets, it's not great, obviously. I hesitate to say they don't have the assets to get anything done because we've seen John Horst do moves I did not anticipate the last few years. Now, that was still when you had a little bit more capital to deal with. At this point, it's basically second round picks only that you have, unless you look into somebody that's currently on the roster and younger that you would point to. But I think it really, the way you have to approach it is the Bucks' best option for improving their perimeter defense is just continuing to get guys like Marjon Beauchamp and Andre Jackson Jr. ready to take on extended minutes and to really continue to show growth. And hopefully that Jay Crowder does not miss a beat either when he returns, because, you know, for the contract purposes, number one, it's going to be tough to do that when you think about a guy like Caruso or anybody else that you would be envisioning. They're probably making around the same dollar figure or close to Alex Caruso. And those are the contracts that's going to be tough for the Bucks to get because you can't aggregate anymore. And you have maybe 1-2 guys that have that type of contract. Otherwise, the rest of your roster is filled out with rookie scale deals and max deals or close to it. And, you know, the other tricky part is then with those guys that you have of similar salaries, number one, you probably lean on them quite a bit right now in the terms of Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis. And secondly, it complicates it even further that you would have to involve a third team, because if you're trading for a guy from a team that's looking to rebuild, they have no real need for a player like that. So you would need to make it a three-way deal, which just complicates it even more. As Brian Windhorst says, a three-way deal, if you need a three-team deal, you don't really have a trade that's going to work. So that's the difficult part to me. Maybe not even so much the assets, but just the current state of the Bucks cap and their contract situations, that they don't have a whole lot of those easily tradable deals anymore. So as much as we pointed to, there are things you need to address there. I think you do have to approach it thinking the best way for us to improve is just to continue to grow and improve guys like Marjon and Andre.
That's bold of you quoting notable Bucks hater Brian Windhorst on here. You know, he's just trying to get rid of all the Bucks and to get rid of Giannis and everything like that. Just kidding, Brian, if you listen. All right. Well, thank you, Justin, for doing this pod. I really appreciate your insight. You can find Justin on the Bucks Radio Network. He's a co-host of Locked On Bucks, and on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, at Justin Garcia NBA.